Good afternoon, everybody. This afternoon's proceedings are being live streamed, but after the usual 10 minutes delay. Those with mobile devices may use them to report what they hear in the hearing room, but only after 10 minutes have elapsed since the event they're reporting. They may not be used for recording or photography. Mr. Ramble.
Emily, I'd like to move on now to consider HN60, who used undercover name Dave Evans. We know that he was deployed between 1998 and the end of 2005. In terms of your interaction with HN60, how would you describe that, please?
He was an acquaintance. I knew him. I remember him, which is like more than some of the others. I went to HN3's house quite a few times, and HN60 was there. We were together in Scotland at the G8. He was one of the many undercovers that were at Scotland for the G8, and I was arrested with him and HN3 in the minibus in Scotland. We went to a Smash Edo protest together, which I remember because he was eating wheat crunches and they weren't vegan. They'd become not vegan. And as someone in the animal rights movement, I was really surprised that he didn't know that. And we went to the Vegetarian Shoe Company because he apparently wanted to buy new boots, which he didn't buy.
If we go back to your description of meeting him at HM3's Duff Flats, because we know that they shared. We know that they shared their residence. We heard in HN3's evidence that he said that you would have only attended a few times. Could you just help us with how many occasions precisely that you attended that location, please?
Quite a few times. I don't know, maybe about a dozen altogether. I mean, I can't remember every single time, but we would go around there and said, and I think HN3 said he'd have these big bags of DVDs, and that was mostly where I encountered HN60 was at his flat and how I knew him. So yeah, it was quite a few times. It wasn't like we were around there every week, but it was, I did go there quite a lot. But
in terms of anything of significance, it really was when you were arrested at the G8 that... Yeah, that's my that was probably the longest sort of period of time that I spent with him was around the G8 and also the Smash Video demo. Because other than that, it was that kind of, someone's fat mate that happens to be there when you're there and you have a conversation with them and, it's fine. But there wasn't a kind of sort of relationship or an organising relationship. And I would like us, please, if we can turn to MPS 0738067. So this is your tab B140. These are Operation Her notes of a meeting with HN60 in 2013. And I'm just going to go, please, to page 4 of this document. It's the last paragraph on this page, please. We'll just expand that. This is the note of the meeting interview with HN60, and he says HN3 don't know of a specific incident, could have been after True Spies, couldn't emphasize the release of minute details, could ruin it all. We were desperate not for people to have a template of the SDS. HN3 and I moved in similar areas but did not know each other. We spoke about it, and with the whole office it was asked, why not come and live with us? And then he says this: you would be on your guard 24 hours if you went into a squat. You'd be totally immersed. I was exposed more to HN3 side rather than he exposed to mine. I had a van, picked up posters. We did not want to fall into something that we could not get out of. Met Emily Apple, and so sharing was for sensible reasons. LAA did not go to G8 as a group. G8 got nicked in Scotland, drove the minibus as a shuttle service, and then this Emily had a sprog, and HN3 and I were coming towards the end of our time. Being arrested throws up problems and then going on. So in terms of the description there, of course this is in note form, but the account HN60 gives about you and your child being in the vicinity at the time, that would you accept that is accurate?
Yeah, I mean that's in terms of the G8, that's accurate. Yes, I find it quite peculiar that he says that sharing was for sensible reasons because he met me. Don't quite understand what he meant by that, but don't think we'll ever know.
Okay. Now, before moving away from HN60 and HN3, I want to ask about your reaction to another document. It's MPS 007-6491, please. So this is at your tab B106. This is a request for HN3 and HN60 to be commended. And I would like to explore the impact on you reading the following on page, if we begin with page 2, but if we could perhaps have pages 2 and 3 up on the screen. Can you see just below the middle of the page, over the lengthy period of RH, so red herrings, HN3 is his code name, over the lengthy period of RH's operation, he provided extremely high-grade intelligence concerning the activities of RTS and other similar militant environmentalists and anarchists who were intimately involved with planning and participating in such high-profile public order, which included the violent Stop the City demonstration in the City of London, known as J18, 18th of June 1999, N30, 30th of November 1999, a demonstration which gravitated to Euston Station, where a police vehicle was set alight, numerous police officers were injured, a large number of violent protesters were arrested. The protests held against the biannual Defence Systems and Equipment International DSEI exhibition held in Chertsey and more recently in Docklands, and the guerrilla gardening protest held in Parliament Square in 2000. And then if we look at the next few words, please. At these events were the inspiration of RTS, which consisted of a very small group of activists, which included Helen Steele, Privacy, and Emily Apple. It must be emphasised that RTS has always been an extremely security conscious and clandestine group which operated by inviting activists into the inner circle only by personal recommendation and a proven track record in activism, all of which RH successfully established over the 8 years of his operation. And so here is the request for both HN3 and HN60 to be commended. But in relation to the focus on HN3, that description where you are named specifically in the application for commendation, what is your response to reading that, in terms of impact that it has on you, given the effect that you've described earlier this morning and seeing your name as part of the justification for him to be awarded a commendation?
I mean, I was disgusted that he'd been nominated for commendation. Yeah. Sort of no words. It made me really angry. It was just kind of like, you infiltrated our lives, you spied on my family. You facilitated a load of the things that we did happening. And yeah, you're being recommended for a commendation. But I think the other thing to say is we're talking about high-grade intelligence, great tradecraft. And I wasn't involved. I was involved in organising the protests at Dicey. I attended J18, I attended N30, and I attended guerrilla gardening. I was not involved in organising them. So even in the request for commendation, we've got 40 intelligence about me. They can't even get that right. I mean, it's beyond ridiculous how bad this intelligence was, how badly it was disseminated, how badly it was represented by management. Because they didn't have any reports on me being involved in organising 3 out of the 4 things that they list. So yes, it was quite ridiculous. But yeah, I actually found it really upsetting that he was nominated for a commendation for that. And in terms of impact, just before we leave the sort of G8 stuff, that arrest, it was a massive policing operation. Our minibus was surrounded by police who put their riot shields right up against the windows. We had dogs barking at us. We had a helicopter overhead. I was in the van with my baby. We were just driving people around. And in HN6's accounts, he was thinking about all the overtime that he would get if he was remanded, whereas I'd already been threatened with social services if I couldn't find someone to collect my child. I was facing the prospect of being remanded when I had a baby that I was breastfeeding, and there is no consideration of any of that. And what happened at that GA arrest was deeply, deeply traumatic and had a massive impact on me and my ability to organise with my child. And all he could think about was his overtime, and it's disgusting.
In terms of what you've just referred to, overtime, and another officer, and moving now, we can take that down to HN 118, undercover name Simon Wellings, gave evidence last week, and I understand you were able to see his evidence.
Yes, I was, yes.
So one of the things that he was explaining at the beginning of his evidence, why he wanted to be an undercover officer, was the financial side of things as well, having an effect on it. And again, just in terms of what you've just described, the impact of hearing about officers referring to overtime, what does that mean to you when you hear that being referred to as a positive reason for these individuals wanting to become undercover officers?
I mean, it's outrageous. We're talking about a unit that was trying to disrupt and our movements, that was trying to invade our privacy, and they were in it for the money. When everything starts to fall apart at the end, a lot of the questions are around overtime. We were all doing this voluntarily because we really deeply, passionately cared about the things that we were protesting about. We cared passionately about the social change that we wanted to create. And these officers were worried about that overtime and how much money they could get out of it and how much they could justify their deployments with their exaggerated intelligence. I mean, Wellings did nothing in the second part of his deployment. He said he sat on the internet. He cut and pasted emails. He cut and pasted posts from easily accessible websites. I think he said the higher-ups didn't know where to look. Well, it wasn't very hard.
In terms of HN 118, you don't have any, or what recollection, if any, do you have of him at all?
Oh, none whatsoever. I was definitely at the Kissinger protest with him in 2002, because we're both on the same video, and I found him on that video. I know from the reports that he was at the Selfridges demo in August 2002, but I have no memory of him whatsoever.
When Guy Taylor gave his evidence, I don't know if you saw Guy Taylor give evidence,
yeah.
And one of the things that he was asked about was in terms of his recollection of HN 118 and when precisely did he meet him. And there was an occasion where 118 describes being in an elevator and having a discussion with Guy Taylor about going to New York. This is in 2002. And the way in which HM 118 described it is that was, in some respects, a bit of a turning point in infiltrating globalised resistance. And I don't want to go into the details of what happened in New York, but 118 produced a report. I wonder if we can put it up on screen. It's MPS 308004. It's at your tab B6. It's his report dated the 8th of February 2002, because we can see that it relates to the trip to New York, but it's a report which refers to to you in there. So this is one of the earliest references in a report by 118 to you. But do you remember, in broad terms, that trip to New York in 2002?
Oh yeah, in broad terms, I definitely remember the trip. I was really curious because this is actually one of the earliest pieces of disclosure that I received from the inquiry, because I don't have any sort of documents that introduce me, that say I turned up at a meeting or anything like that. And some of the earliest reporting I've got is actually from Simon Wellings and not from HN3. So yes, I definitely remember going to New York. I'm quite curious around why Martin Hogben's name has been removed, who was the corporate spy at CAT, because that's who I was staying with at the time, and also that he does not, I am noting, having a special branch reference or anything afterwards. I don't remember what he is describing in this report, but I definitely remember going to New York.
He refers to you by your full name, so he doesn't say, for example, a broad description of you or Emily, surname.
It's fully funded. He knows exactly who I am. And this is what I mean about the missing reporting, because I don't have anything that introduces me like that, but he clearly knows exactly who I am in this report.
All right, and if we take that down, please. Another of an early report from HN 118. I wonder if we can please put up on screen MPS 0027912, please. Sir, this is at your tab B24. Now, I want to go through this report in some detail. So we can see this is one of 118's reports on globalised resistance, in particular the Ariel Sharon protest outside Downing Street. So members of Globalised Resistance, London-based anti-capitalist group, were out in force yesterday evening, Monday the 14th of July, to protest against the visit of the Israeli Premier Ariel Sharon to Downing Street. Guy Taylor, the de facto leader of the group, had deployed 2 pairs of scouts out onto the ground in an attempt to discover which entrance and exit Special Branch would use to facilitate Sharon's visit. If we can just move down, this proved unnecessary, as an arriving group of activists that included Emily Apple, not a GR member, but certainly willing to share useful information, were able to eavesdrop on a conversation being held in the street by senior police officers outlining the entire plan for getting Sharon's protection package in and out of Downing Street. Now, can you just help us with that, please? So this is, again, an early report from HN 118 and referring to you. Do you know what that is a reference to? Does that
only vaguely. I mean, it rings a vague bell. It sounds like if it's something I've overheard, I would have shared, but only really rings a vague bell.
In terms of the way in which it's described, so referring to a senior police officer outlining the entire plan for getting Sharon's protection package in and out of Downing Street. It sounds, from the wording of that, you're privy to, as a result of eavesdropping, some very specific information about the movement of Ariel Sharon. Again, does that ring any bells with you in terms of...
Not really. I mean, the entire plan, I think, would be an exaggeration, because I think... I mean, the senior police officers knew who I was as well, so if they were discussing their entire plan in front of me, that would have been a bit silly, and I don't think they'd have done that. They might well have given sort of some details over sort of timings or something like that, and, you know, if I heard something, yes, I would have passed it on, but, you know, I don't remember it specifically, and I certainly think, yeah, the entire plan is a massive exaggeration.
If we just read on, in any case, the intelligence gained made little difference, as the attempted arrest of a protester deep in the crowd that had gathered proved to be the catalyst for minor public disorder that rumbled on for the next half hour or so. This culminated in the arrest of Taylor. He was attempting to lead a dash into Whitehall to carry out a sit-down protest. at least 3 others arrests were made, including the arrest of a Korean national and 1 ISM member. So again, is this something that you recall in terms of the arrests that took place?
Well, I remember Guy got arrested, but I don't know whether I heard about that later. I'm not sure that I was sort of there at the time. I don't think I stayed particularly long at that protest. I think I can't really remember. It's not one that sticks in my memory, and I don't think we stuck around. I don't think we kind of felt that we were going to achieve much being there, and I think we probably just left.
And so I'm just not going to go through all the report, but just the last 2 paragraphs here beginning, it is important to note. So when it is described here, it's important to note that prior to the disorder, globalised resistance activists had been busily parcelling through the crowd in both an attempt to both stir up the crowd and up the ante and gauge people's willingness to mount some form of direct action. Instrumental in this endeavour were Taylor himself, Chris Nynam, Julie Waterson, Amy Jowett, Privacy, Simon Wellings, Privacy and the visiting Virginia Regino. These individuals were also centrally involved once the disorder broke out, in particular in whipping up the crowd in the attempt to de-arrest and trap the police officers carrying out the initial arrest. Now, from your description just now, were you gone by this point? This is something that occurred after you left, or is this something that you recall?
Well, there was no whipping up the crowd. There was nothing like that. There was, no disorder either. From everything that I know about what I remember and what I know about the event, this is another example of this sort of exaggerated language. So, like Globalised Resistance was a group that I had a working relationship with at times, but I wasn't involved in due to the sort of hierarchical nature of the group, because that was the way that I worked. But I never witnessed anyone from GR whipping up a crowd or trying to provoke disorder. That just wasn't something that's happened. In terms of sort of Guy and stuff like that, that's not anything I have ever seen. I've been on a lot of protests with Guy and have never seen him do anything like that. So this feels, again, like a massive exaggeration. It doesn't seem at all credible to me. I can't say in terms of what I witnessed, because I really don't remember, but I definitely don't remember anything like that happening.
One of the ways in which HM118 described himself as webmaster for globalised resistance and his involvement in that side of things for globalised resistance when he was undercover. And one of the things that was referred to was a newsletter called Resist. And I wonder if you can just tell us a little about this and how individuals who were not necessarily in globalised resistance would have been aware of online publications such as Resist. Could you just help us with that, please?
Everyone was aware of different leftist publications and stuff like that. Some of them were just online, some of them would be handed out on demos. But other than that, I don't have a huge amount that I can add to that, but they'd be very accessible.
You have provided the inquiry with an article in Resist. I'm going to ask if we can put it up on the screen, please. It's UCPI 38159, so it's your tab A54. It is, Emily, your exhibit 54, and we'll just put it up on screen and you'll recognise it when you see it. So this is, we can see at the bottom right-hand corner at www. and we've got resist.org.uk. So we have... and was this typical of the online?
Oh, I'd imagine so. I can't really speak to what was typical of what Globalised Resistance put out online, to be honest. But I'd imagine so.
And this example that you have produced, we can see it is in relation to the topic that we were just looking at in relation to Ariel Sharon's visit. We can see Israeli leader branded war criminal on arrival in London. Ariel Sharon gets furious welcome, and we can see the article by Simon Wellings. And we can see hundreds of people took to the streets to protest against the flying visit of the Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, and we can see the article drafted by HN 118 there. Yes, thank you. Can we take that down, please?
I mean, I would just say I think it's quite incredible to have these undercover officers writing articles about these demonstrations. Like, they're putting in these intelligence reports telling one narrative, and they're writing articles with another narrative, and contributing to what we're saying to the political narrative as undercover officers. I think is quite incredible.
I want to ask you some more about FitWatch, and before doing so, I wonder if we can put up on screen UCPI 38142, so your tab A38, it's Emily, your exhibit 37. I wonder if you could just help us with what this document is and just tell us a little more about your setting up FitWatch, please.
Yes, so a friend of mine came to a Disarmed IC meeting and said that she wanted to try and do something about the presence of fit teams outside our meetings. So she held up just a piece of paper in front of the cameras, and she was arrested for it. And it was really noticeable at the meeting afterwards that there was a change in the atmosphere of the meeting, that people felt more empowered. There was a real tangible difference in our organising from someone having actually stood up to the repression that we were facing outside. And then she started getting more targeted by them as well following that. And I'd seen so many other people being put off from going to protests. I had people saying to me they couldn't do what I did because of the attention I received from the forward intelligence teams. I had to tell people, when I used to facilitate meetings or trainings, I used to have to tell people, if you see me on the streets, you're very, very welcome to come and say hello to me. But if you do, it is really likely that within the next 5 minutes you will be stopped and searched, and you will have interest in you because of the forward intelligence teams. And I had to give people that warning so they had informed consent over whether they wanted to come and talk to me on a protest or not. I had got to the point where I'd already had one mental health breakdown directly as a response to forward intelligence policing. They'd followed me into my dreams. I was having regular nightmares about them. There were people who would say that they wouldn't come to another protest in London because of the behaviour of the forward intelligence teams. And the combination of that and seeing the impact that just having someone holding up a bit of paper outside a meeting had made me think that we needed to do something more, that we actually needed a concerted campaign to tackle the repression that we were facing. So, it was a civil liberties campaign. It was aimed at challenging the validity of having these officers outside our meetings, of having these officers following us around, and actually being proactive in trying to do something about that and to challenge the repression that we were facing. And we ignored them for a long time, and part of the reason we ignored them was we didn't want a focus on the police to distract from the causes that we were protesting about. And so one of the parts of this proposal as well was that we would sort of maybe go to other people's protests, so of causes that we support, but we will have so much capacity in different things that we can go to. So, for example, I went to quite a few animal rights protests to do FitWatch stuff, and likewise, friends from there came in and did it at some of our protests. But it felt, as I've said there, that once and for all we needed to admit they're a problem and the impact they were having on our movements.
When 118 gave evidence, do you recall that he recalled a couple of occasions when he saw you being pursued by fit
Yeah.
officers. And I just want to ask you about the words that he used to see if you agree that in those instances, he whether he captured accurately what sort of effect this was having on you, because he said it struck a rather odd sight, and he described you looking a little bit distressed, and these words, that they stuck to her like glue. Now, 118's words there, does that capture well?
Yeah,
What
one of
they
the few
were
things
doing?
that he said that does capture something well. Yeah, they were... because if you think of someone being followed by the police, you might think, oh, you know, like there's police sort of somewhere over there watching what you're doing, or, you know, there's some distance. What the fit used to do is they would be sort of right at my shoulder. There was sort of no space to manoeuvre. I remember protests where I was followed so closely that my friends couldn't walk next to me. It was incredibly intrusive.
When the point was put to him in terms of, well, with all this reporting on you, it's going to increase the amount of attention from fit officers, his response was, yeah, I can see there's a clear risk. You know, you can end up being very well traced, was the word he used, for being well traced, if that makes sense. You could. The amount of reporting that went in would clearly have been done there. And then he said this, I hope there were checks and balances above that to try to ensure that those people were a legitimate target of that type of activity. But I can see the risk, yes. What was your reaction when HM 118 first acknowledged that there was a risk in over-reporting on you, leading to more attention from fit officers, but in particular as well, his reference to hoping that there were checks and balances?
I mean, in terms of what he admitted, and he admitted to the chilling effect as well, I was glad that he admitted and recognised that. I think anything that euphemistically hopes in some ways that there are checks and balances in police intelligence and how it is disseminated and how it is used is ridiculously naive. I mean, this inquiry has shown time and time again that there weren't any checks and balances, and in fact it went the other way, and it led to more and more targeting and more of an impact on my mental health. And it's why CR11 and the FIT should be part of this inquiry, so they can answer these questions themselves of what checks and balances were there, what were they getting from the reporting, how was their reporting feeding both ways. It's this, you know, because it's cyclical. None of it exists in isolation, and there most definitely were not checks and balances. Then that's not the way this kind of intelligence works. And it's still not working to this day.
Bearing in mind his evidence in relation to what he saw, I'm going to ask if we could just go to MPS 0526933. So at your tab B89. So these are authorities for his deployment from 2005. And it's a bundle of these authorities. I want to go, please, to page 60 in that document. So at your tab B89. And so if we go to, just wait for that to be put up on screen. If we go to page 60, and it's bullet points 1 and 3 I want to ask you about. So here, RW, so by this stage, Ring Race is his code name, RW continues to report on the anti-FIT activists Privacy and Emily Apple, who want to disrupt the FIT team's effectiveness in public order situations. There have now been several instances of activists setting out to frustrate the FIT as they attempt to carry out their duties. This has involved activity such as trying to physically obstruct the movement of the officers and holding up sheets or tarpaulins to block the photographer's view. DCI Flood will take this difficult issue forward at a senior level to try and reduce its impact on future public order events. So you've described holding objects up so that it prevents them filming or taking photographs. Well, the reference is to trying to physically obstruct the movement of them. Was that part of the Fit Watch approach, or what was done?
I mean, not so much obstructing their movement, obstructing their ability to take photographs and film people, absolutely. And one of the things that we did, and we did successfully, was to challenge the legality of their surveillance, and whether, because if we were arrested quite a few times for obstructing police in the execution of their duty, and putting them to the proof of what the execution of their duty is, what was the lawful duty, and the legal basis for them to be able to stand outside our meetings taking photographs of us.
If we go to the third bullet point, it's not directly in relation to FIT, but whilst we have this page up, you can see the third bullet point states that all activists attending the DSEI Arms Fair protests on the 11th of September were asked to regroup or converge on Canning Town bus station at 4:30 p.m. Historically, this type of assembly has seen the worst disorder at the DSEI protests and has involved activists setting off on fast-moving, free-flowing snake march-style dashes through busy road intersections and street party gatherings accompanied by a samba band and sound system. So again, this is document in relation to authorising HN 118. What would you say to the justification that, well, there is justification in having an undercover officer reporting on just those responsible for the quote-unquote worst disorder at these DSEI protests, and describing, as it is here, these fast-moving snake march-style dashes through busy road intersections? What would you say to those who say, well, there is some justification, isn't there, for having someone in these groups?
I mean, I find it quite hard to answer that seriously when you're talking about the worst disorder involving a snake march and a samba band and a sound system. That's disorder? I mean, seriously? I mean, it's just laughable. I mean, this is just like trying to have a protest. I mean, dashes through busy road intersections, like we were careful when we occupied roads and had people to stop traffic and stuff like that. It wasn't just like people running through traffic. And to say, this would have been by 2007, I'm presuming, because we'd started Fit Watch. And after years of Disarmed IC being the main target of an undercover policing operation that is named on all the authorisations as the main target, the worst disorder that he can come up with is a free-flowing snake march with a samba band and a sound system. I mean, that defines credibility that there is any need to infiltrate protests that do that. I mean, I don't actually remember this plan either. I mean, I have no idea whether this is made up. That rings no bells to me whatsoever. But it's the point that I was making earlier about the way the police use the terms disorder and public disorder to mean anything, from a sit down to actual things that could be classified as disorder. But I can't see anything in this that could possibly justify infiltrating a group.
If we turn, please, to...
Can I make one other comment about something
Yes.
else on this page? Because there's the comprehensive contact details about someone centrally involved in organising with CAD, cited as an example of his excellent strategic and tactical intelligence. That person, I went to the CAT archives recently, that person did police liaison. She filled out forms for protests with all her contact details on them and liaised with the police. That was hardly...
And so looking at this, which bullet points are you referring to? On this?
One,
Fourth.
two. Thank you, fourth, yes.
And if we can expand
Yeah.
that so we can all see that.
Yeah, I just wanted to point it out because, yes, she filled out forms for police liaison that all her contact details were on. This is not an example of excellent strategic and tactical intelligence. And while we're talking about this, I think it's really important to state, like CAT is an NGO. We organise protests, we do advocacy work, we do legal work. I do press work now. And I was initially told that CAT was targeted because of me, and I've seen so much evidence, like evidence before any of the first reports on me appear, that say this CAT was targeted. One of the manager's reports that I probably won't be able to find the note for. HM49. They say that HM3 was authorised to target CAT because the group was known to hold protests and demonstrations which had the potential to result in serious public disorder. So I think there's a very credible case that CAT, as an NGO, was targeted. And, having things like this that is ridiculous intelligence because it's information that was known about someone from CAT. And this was after when I wasn't working with CAT, so I wasn't connected to CAT at all at that point. So they don't even have that excuse by this point.
So in terms of, we were looking at various of these bullet points, including this one, but if we look at the second paragraph at the top, the last sentence, it's headed UCO RW has submitted 23 reports in this review period. Some of the more notable reports are as follows. So what we have is a summary of what's described as...
Yeah, and if they're the notable reports, I dread to think what's in the non-notable reports.
Could we go to page 128 before leaving this document, please? It is paragraph 2 on page 128. So in terms of, refers to HM118's role, and it says an extremely useful role performed by RW is the provision of briefings on issues around activism and protests from the activist standpoint that can be used to brief officers involved in public order policing, and we can see includes CO11 and FIT teams. And again, in terms of this particular officer making briefings to the FIT team or providing intelligence that to some extent was disseminated to FIT teams, but again, going back to what you pointed out at the beginning, you yourself were not aware of this particular undercover officer, HN118.
No, I wasn't. But also, this cyclical thing of if you've got someone like 118 who is either he is exaggerating or his managers are exaggerating his intelligence, and then that's being used for briefings, then we've got a situation where we're again perpetuating that cycle of exaggerated intelligence, then being used by CO11, being used by the FIT teams to then further repress us, and using that exaggerated intelligence as justification for what they were doing on the streets. So we've got this self-fulfilling prophecy of exaggerated intelligence and then repression of our movements. I don't know what useful briefings he could provide, really, given...
One of the things that you mentioned was Selfridges. Could
Yes.
you just help us with that, again, with the context of you not knowing 118, but could you just sort of help us with your recollection of that particular event that we know that HM118 reported on, please? This is 3rd of August 2002.
So we organised regular protests in the food hall of Selfridges because they stopped wine and other foods from Palestinian occupied territories that were sold as Israeli produce, and we wanted to draw attention to the fact that Selfridges was doing this, to stand in solidarity with Palestine people, to make the point, this is produce on stolen land from a population that had been violently repressed and forced out of their homes, so that then these products could then be produced and sold as Israeli. So we did a series of protests highlighting that, where we would go into the food hall, we'd cause some minor disruption. I think sometimes we'd take food through the checkout, sometimes we'd shout or blow whistles and stuff like that. At the time, there was no legislation that actually meant that was illegal. Like, you could go and do stuff like that and it was perfectly legal. So we did this quite regularly. We sort of had a campaign against Selfridges to do this quite regularly. And with the one in August, we'd organised with quite a few different groups to come together to make it a bigger protest than the sort of small group ones that we've been doing previously. On the day, I remember I wore a wig and I got into the store and got chucked out again. Remember I was wearing smart shoes and I got blisters. This is like just the weird things that stick in your mind. But I remember the policing was quite often violent at those protests. I don't remember, and I don't have anything to add to the descriptions of what happened with Simon Wellings, but I do remember violent policing. I remember I got punched in the head at one of them. But yes, it was a protest.
Again, in terms of that suggestion of there being justification for these types of action and the volume of the different types of action that you've described, again, what is your response to someone who would say, well, it is justified to have someone in the group reporting on events that you've just described in relation to Selfridges and the disruption there, that it is there's a proper policing purpose in that? What would you say to those who say there is a justifying?
They were legal protests. We've got to stop othering protest. We've got to stop seeing protest as something to be suppressed, to be repressed, to be reported on. Protest is a beautiful and essential part of our democracy, including disruptive protests. What we were doing wasn't illegal, and also they weren't infiltrating the organising. They were there, like Wellings just turned up on the day. And from the accounts of others who did witness his behaviour, seemed to be the one provoking any problems on the ground as well. So, I cannot see any justification. We're talking about minor disruption. If you think about all the money, all the resources that go into this or any undercover policing operation, that the seriousness of what those people are doing, if it is ever justified, should be so serious. Not creating a minor bit of disruption in Selfridges.
I want to ask you about Climate Camp. So this is August 2007. You remember back to 118's evidence, and by that time, he knew that his deployment was coming to an end. You remember he was quite reluctant, in fact, to be deployed into Climate Camp, but his evidence was he was told to do it by Frankie Flood, so he did. I'm going to ask if we can put up on screen MPS 0075691, so at your tab B113. So this is a report from 118 dated 13th of August 2007. So it says there are approximately 250 persons present at the Climate Camp. Some factions from the North and Midlands coalesced around Simon Lewis, etc., are conciliatory towards the police presence. And then this, others, spurred on by PWE, VSP and Emily Apple, are keen to force any patrols off the camp as soon as they have sufficient numbers. Recceing has taken place and is concentrating on access routes for a mass walkout on Sunday. Action on Sunday is likely to involve a five-finger type event. Now, this reference to certain factions being conciliatory towards the police, but describing you in a group who are, these were keen to force any patrols off the camp. How fair is that a description of what you wanted to achieve?
Oh, that one I'd say is fair. with climate camps, we created these beautiful autonomous areas on occupied land, and we had kitchens, we had consensus-making decision processes, we had big meetings. There was absolutely no need to have police patrols on the camp, but especially having fit officers on the camp. So, you think about everything that I've said about the fit in terms of the harassment, in terms of trying to identify people, in terms of trying to gather intelligence on people. There was absolutely no justification and no need to have these officers walking around where people were meeting, where people were sleeping, where people were eating. And I didn't think that they should be allowed into that space or should be welcomed into that space, and that they shouldn't be there.
Could we move to HN 18? So Robert Hastings, undercover name Rob Harrison, deployed August 2004 to December 2007. Is it right again that you have very little memory of HN 18? Could you just help us with looking back, what recollections that you have of him?
I've got no recollections of him either. No, other than, obviously I know I got arrested with him, but I don't remember him from the meeting beforehand or anything else. So yeah, I really don't remember him.
In your statement, you say that you had friends in the groups that he was involved in, and that included State of Emergency, No Borders and ISM. Mm-hmm. So you had friends in those groups.
Yeah, I had friends in all of those groups, and I'm obviously glad we've heard from ISM. I think it's a shame that we're not hearing from anyone from State of Emergency or No Borders, given that they were the targeted groups. I'd moved out of London by that point, so I wasn't involved in the sort of day-to-day organising. I mean, I think if I'd been in London, I would have been involved more, but I wasn't. So I was sort of tangentially involved. People would tell me when things were happening, and I'd get involved in things, but I wasn't involved in the organising.
I'd like to go to one of HN 18's authority documents that names you. It is MPS 0526935. So it's at your tab B87. Could we please turn to page 81 of that document? And it's paragraph 5 on page 81. So if we can see 3 paragraphs up from the bottom of that page, you see in the middle of the third line, beginning significantly CW. So HN 18's code name was Common Wheel, so CW for Common Wheel. So it states here, significantly, CW has identified 2 anarchist activists, Emily Apple and Privacy, who have launched a campaign called FitWatch, intending to disrupt and ultimately prevent the use of police forward intelligence team officers. And then this. The main effort has been simply to obstruct FIT's evidence gatherers and photographers. However, intelligence has provided that there are aspirations to discover FIT officers' personal details with a view to targeting their homes and families. There are also efforts to recruit activists to the cause. Is that accurate, the reference to the aspirations to discover FIT officers' personal details with a view to targeting their homes and families and to recruit activists to this cause?
No. We had no aspirations to discover personal details, and we definitely did not want to target their homes and families. That wasn't something we discussed. It was not part of the campaign. This was a very, very forward-facing, open campaign. We were literally standing in front of the cameras that of these officers that knew us, there would have been absolutely 0 point in us targeting their homes and families. It's not something I would have done. I would have had no desire to target their families. And it would have been the wrong target, they were the officers on the streets. They weren't in charge of the targeting and what they were doing in that sense. But also, it was ridiculous.
Is there any explanation you can think of, anything that someone could have said or discussions that could have taken place that would have given the wrong impression in terms of exploring how this information or this allegation that's of the aspirations of the group or you found its way into this authorisation document? Is there anything that was said that might have been misinterpreted?
No, nothing from me. There might have been, I don't know, he might have overheard some silly conversations in a pub that didn't mean anything, but not from me. I didn't talk about it. It wasn't part of the campaign. It wasn't something we talked about doing. Someone not connected to the campaign, I don't know, I have to ask him. I don't know where he got it from, but it certainly wasn't from me or the other person mentioned in this report at all.
All right.
It is utterly fabricated and had, I believe, a very, very serious impact.
What impact do you think it had then?
So, around this time, obviously, as I set out, the broad intelligence teams really did not like me very much. But around this time, with IC 2000, around the time of Climate Camp and then IC 2007, there was a shift in policing from that very, very personal targeting, and yes, violence and arrests, but to really personalised, vindictive violence, to the point where so many times after I was arrested, I came out of custody really battered and bruised and traumatised. And I was frequently strip searched. I was treated as if I was this incredibly violent threat. And I think a lot of it comes down to this type of intelligence, because we also know this was disseminated to CO11. It was taken further. It didn't just stick in this report. It went back to CO11. Frankie Flood talks about taking things forward. There's discussions about how they're going to deal with this. The police, quite obviously, the police, if they are presented with intelligence that some of their officers are going to be targeted in their homes, took it seriously. But the way that was taken seriously, firstly, it was made up, but the way that manifested on the streets was extreme violence. And I think this is still having an impact today. So one of the things that sort of started happening around this was I started getting markers for violence. And in 2010, I was, again, wrongfully arrested. And on that occasion, I was dragged straight into custody, held face down on the floor by 2 male police officers while a male custody officer watched from the door. They strip searched me. They left me with a paper suit to wear. They left my knickers because they discovered I was on my period. And I received an apology. I received compensation. They found it was an unlawful strip search, and that it shouldn't have happened. But I also received a marker for violence, and that marker is still on my record today. And it was another form of punishment. It was putting these violence markers on our records. That is still impacting. Is the product of this kind of intelligence and this level of exaggeration and threat that led to the way that I was treated in custody that is still impacting the way that I'm policed today. So the impact doesn't stop in 2007. It doesn't stop in 2010. It is still continuing to this day.
Thank you. Can we take that document down, please? I want to ask you about some of HN18's reporting. Could we please turn up MPS 0072517, so at your tab B104. This is an intelligence report from HN18 dated the 6th of May 2007. Sorry, 0073517. Thank you. Thanks. Now, if we have a look at this, on Saturday, 28th of April 07, a public meeting was held in room 3C at the University of London Union to discuss the possibility of organising a protest against the Defence Systems and Equipment International, DSEI, scheduled to take place at the Excel Centre in East London in September 2007. This meeting had been widely advertised across a number of internal email lists, and then it refers to state of emergency and no borders and indie media. The meeting was advertised, and the times given says this: those attending the meeting had been forewarned to expect a police presence, and upon their arrival they were met by a forward intelligence team. Emily Apple, and then a number of names redacted, took it upon themselves to challenge the behaviour of the FIT, with privacy being particularly unhappy at being photographed. This took place whilst individuals attending the meeting sat in room 3C waiting for Emily Apple to begin the meeting. It soon became apparent that a struggle was taking place outside of the University London Union, and activists made their way outside in time to see privacy being arrested. A young white male, approximately 14 years of age, was also arrested. Once this was over, the meeting soon began, with the following identifiable individuals being present. Emily Apple, if we just go over the page, please. And we can see others whose names are protected with privacy, redaction boxes, and then it refers, I wonder if we can just zoom out so we can see the entire page. And then just this in the next paragraph. The meeting began with a short presentation being given by Privacy, which outlined the history of DSEI and provided a suitably veiled history of the activities that had been undertaken against the companies taking part. Emily Apple then proceeded to ask those present if there was any real desire to engage in action against DSEI, which met with a very subdued yes. Apple then stated that if there was no real enthusiasm shown with the corresponding willingness to take on organisational tasks, it would result in the responsibility falling on those who had done so previously, something which many were keen to avoid. Apple then stressed the need for those present to engage as widely as possible with groups and individuals who might be interested in taking part in some form of organised protest. This resulted in the suggestion being made that Stop the War Coalition be approached, which met with a muted response. Now, just pausing there, and if we can zoom out. This description, we have 118's reporting of a meeting in April 2007 at the University of London Union. In terms of accuracy, would you accept it is an accurate report, at least in terms of that meeting?
No.
But why not?
So, in terms of people waiting for me to start the meeting, I remember actually leaving my friend outside and having a conversation with her because I knew that I was due to facilitate the meeting. So I knew I needed to go inside, but I was worried about her and I wanted to check on her first. I don't remember I don't think we actually went outside to see her being arrested. I'm not entirely sure about that. And this was a meeting I was talking about, that actually the whole energy of that meeting changed because of that challenge to the fit team, and I remember it being a really positive meeting. So I don't recognise the description of it that's given here at all. I don't understand what he means by a suitably veiled history. I mean, that's a weird phrasing. I've no idea what that means. But it's like there's something being hidden. There was nothing being hidden. It's very possible that I said to people, because I quite often say this to people, as Amy will know, that if we want something to happen, because people quite often come to meetings and they want to see things happen, but they would seem to think they're going to miraculously manifest themselves or someone else is going to organise it. So I do quite often say to people, if we want this to happen, what needs to happen? Like, there are certain things that need doing to make this plan happen, and people need to take on responsibility for doing some of those things. That's something I say quite a lot.
Well, the report ends, it says that the meeting then broke up with a small core group meeting in the ULU bar, whilst no further decisions were taken regarding DSEI. This social interaction gave Emily Apple the opportunity to undertake the role of matriarch for the benefit of those present. That description of what happened after the meeting, what's your reaction to what is set out there, please?
Well, I'm going to start with the role of the matriarch because that is absolutely disgusting sexist language that should have no place in a policing report, that would not be made about a man. And I did think when I first read it, I thought that was because I was a mother that he was adopting that language, but I've since seen him use that language about someone else in another report who, as far as I'm aware, or might be a mother, but as far as I'm aware, isn't. Everything that I have heard about Harrison Hastings, he is a deeply, deeply disturbing, like, he makes my blood run cold hearing what he did to Maya, and then seeing this language in that report. He has a problem with women, this officer. He really, really does. He is chilling, I have no words to I'm quite scared by the fact I knew him, even though I don't remember him, given what he's done. But I think that kind of language is so indicative of that sort of problem with strong women. And that comes up quite a lot in the state of emergency reports, that he does not like the fact that there are strong women in that group, and he comments on it. In terms of the small core group meeting, that's also rubbish. It was just kind of like, we had a meeting, people who wanted to go to the pub went to the pub. It wasn't a kind of like, oh, now I'm going to have a small core group of us go to the pub. It was just like, who wants to go to the pub and have a drink?
In terms of, we've heard reference to this a number of times, that after meetings, that people naturally would go to the pub and have some drinks and the conversation would continue then. And sometimes the point is made that, well, actually, it's in the discussions that happen afterwards, in some sort of like pub environment, that's when really useful information is divulged. And so it is all very well going to public meetings, looking what's on various web pages or email groups. But again, in terms of this suggestion of justification, that really you need someone in there to participate in that pub chat at the end, because that's where you get the really useful information. What was your response to that suggestion, that it is important to have people in undercover officers in those environments where you get, as here, the core group discussing important things about the group?
I mean, I don't think we were, or we weren't on this occasion. They said no further decisions were taken. Yeah, I mean, we talk about politics in the pub. Like, we will continue organising, and I mean, we're very boring. We talk about politics a lot. And we talk about organising a lot. But, the way I put it in the second statement that I wrote, activists, like the rest of the population, we talk shit in pubs. And if you're looking at it with no filter, then you can't extract anything from those pub conversations whatsoever. I've heard people in pubs claiming they've done things that I know they haven't done. I've heard people claim they're going to do things that I know that they have no intention of doing. We've had some amazing plans that have come out of pubs, all of which are the ones that I can think of. We're not impacted at all by any undercover policing or any reporting. But for every good plan, there's 20, I'd say probably more like 50 or 100, that are utter rubbish. There's things that we discuss as a joke. There's things that we talk about to let off steam. There's stuff that we'd only say after a few pints that we had no intention of doing whatsoever. And the other thing, there was a culture of sort of machismo and bravado around some of those conversations in the pub. It was a way of letting off steam. And to any other undercover officer or, any informers, if they say, oh, I heard it in the pub, and there is no other corroboration of that piece of intelligence, it needs to be treated with the utmost suspicion, because 9 times out of 10, what was discussed in the pub either didn't come to anything, or was people letting off steam, people making false claims. It just did not work like that. If anything was going to come out of one of those pub discussions, there would have been further meetings, there would be sober meetings. I don't do actions drunk, so it's not like we were having a few pints and then going out and doing something. If an idea came up in the pub, and we actually wanted to take it further, and in the cold light of day, we thought, actually, this is a really good plan, we want to do something with it. I mean, the whole proposal for Disarmed IC 2003, and building a large coalition of groups to oppose the arms fair came out of, we weren't in a pub, but we were somewhere drinking, and we were talking about how we got more people involved in opposing the arms fair. That was a really good thing that came out of us sort of just drinking, and it also resulted in a very public-facing proposal that was on the internet and didn't need, with that one, a corporate spy infiltrating it. But that was the culture at the time. There is no credibility to saying I overheard something in the pub whatsoever. And that would be the same with the majority of people who go to the pub and people have a drink and they say slightly silly things or they exaggerate stories. It's just not credible.
If we can take that document down, I'd like to ask you about a leaflet that you've provided to the inquiry. It's your Exhibit 32. It's UCPI 38137, so that's at your tab A33. Now, in terms of this particular event, is this something that you recall?
Oh, I remember the event itself, yeah. It's a sticker, not a leaflet.
So in terms of, again, the question about justification of reporting on groups that you're involved with, here is a flyer: sack Parliament, no more wars, blockade the Houses of Parliament, October the 9th, 2006. And again, it's that same question. If someone were to say, well, there's some justification, this is a group saying sack Parliament, blockade the Houses of Parliament, there's some justification in having intelligence on what that group were going to do. Would you agree with that?
There's zero benefit whatsoever. We're talking about blockade, which didn't happen. But no, I mean, this was a publicly advertised action. There was no need to have someone in the organising group for it whatsoever. But even worse than that is that we've got someone in the organising group who is then exaggerating intelligence that we've got reports on that show that exaggerated intelligence was then being fed into CO11 that was then informing the policing response and then resulting in a massive policing operation that was very repressive, that I got arrested at, that was all entirely unnecessary. I mean, the bigger question is, if you talk about police resources, like how much money was wasted? I mean, let alone the repression of our movements, all that kind of stuff. Even if you just wanted to take it from the point of view of the intelligence wasn't good. It led to so much money being wasted on policing that it's ridiculous. There's no credibility to, and this is protest. This isn't about anything serious. This is about having a protest. It was a protest against the war. It was a protest against the unjust SOCPA legislation that banned all protests in Parliament Square that's since been repealed. And it was highlighting the civil liberties infringement of the fact that if you live in a democracy, you should be able to go to the heart of that democracy and protest in front of the building that is making those laws. And the fact that that SOCPA legislation prevented people and made it illegal to go to where legislation is made and protest is such a huge infringement of our civil liberties, and that's what that protest was highlighting.
Let me ask you about another of the exhibits that you have provided. It's your Exhibit 34. It's UCPI 38139, so it's your tab A35. I wonder if you can bring that up on screen. We've heard reference to indie media, and so this is an indie media article in relation to, we can see M19, so this is in relation to a demonstration on the 19th of March, hence M19, in 2007. And so just orientating ourselves to what we can see here. So bearing point noise demo, state of emergency. And we can see there. In fact, the location that we can see there is next to where we are now. It's in Paternoster Square. Right, yeah. And we can see yesterday, to mark the 4th anniversary of the invasion of Iraq, a surprise noise demo was held outside the London offices of Bearing Point, the consultancy company chosen by USAID to draft Iraq's new oil law. And can you just explain to us what we are seeing in that particular photograph? Could you just talk us through what we're looking at there, please?
Yeah, a very small legal demonstration outside offices to highlight the fact that we engaged in an illegal war for oil, and the companies that were then profiting from the carve-up of Iraq's resources. This is a very legal, small protest that, again, is completely exaggerated in the reporting.
Well, if we just have a look at the lower photograph as well, please, just to... and so in terms of just broadly, in terms of numbers, we can see obviously some, it looks like security staff, but in terms of numbers, how many more people were there than we can see there, just so we have an idea?
Oh, not a huge number. Probably, I'd say 20 of us maximum. That's absolute maximum. It was very small. It was a noise demo. You are allowed to, or you should be allowed in a democracy to gather outside a company and have some banners and bang some drums.
And we can see some of the description. People use drums, whistles, foghorns, saucepans, alarms, and their own voices. It's described there. Please, can we take that down? And now can we move to MPS 0073073? So at your tab B102, this is HN18's report in relation to what we have just looked at, having been reported in indie media. So we can see this is what HN18 states. Monday the 19th of March 2007, On Monday, the 19th of March, activists from the State of Emergency Collective gathered outside the offices of Bearing Point in Paternoster Square, London, to protest at the activities of the company within Iraq, which are viewed by members of State of Emergency as representing little more than a capitalist corporate rape of the country's resources. This demonstration was not publicised prior to the demonstration taking place and represented the recognition by members of the collective that it was not capable of organising a large-scale meeting on the scale of the Sack Parliament demonstration in October 2006. Now, just pausing there, the reference here to the demonstration not being publicised prior to it taking place. Again, in terms of what is set out here, obviously HN18 was able to provide the intelligence of what was happening. But again, in terms of the justification, if HN18 was not providing this report, it would have been impossible for anyone from a policing perspective to plan for this event. What would you say in relation to that?
Why would anyone from a policing perspective need to plan for that event? We're talking about a small number of people having a noise demo outside of a building. There is no policing purpose in that whatsoever. There is no need for the police to know about that. The police do not need to know about every protest that we hold and that we organise. Protest is organic. It happens. It does not need to be policed. If there had been no policing of that protest whatsoever, if no police had turned up, we would have stood outside the building for a few hours. We would have made some noise. We'd have gone home, and that was the point of the protest. It was perfectly legal. It was small. There is absolutely no need for the police to know about it or to have a policing response, let alone infiltrate the group to report on it and to exaggerate the reporting and the threat of it in advance as well.
We usually break at 3:30. Before we do so, can I just ask you, please, about what because you referred to HN18's language. There's just one brief report I want to ask you about. It's at MPS 007-6438, please. So it's your tab B133. It's HN18's report dated the 5th of November 2007, Bash the Rich, Saturday 4th of November 2007. Can we turn to the second page, please? And it's the last paragraph. Can you see where it says the activities of Fitwatch were also subjected to scrutiny, with some individuals believing that whilst the idea of the group is worthwhile, the current implementation is ineffective and lacking focus. Some ascribe this to the personalisation of the campaign by Emily Apple, thereby rendering the group subject to her whim and pleasure, and those of her erstwhile fellow activists' privacy. Some activists feel that Apple's apparent insistence on getting arrested at every opportunity renders her a liability to those possibly working with or in close proximity to her. So there's language such as the group being subject to your whim and pleasure. In terms of accuracy, what's your response to reading
ridiculous. That? I mean, whim and pleasure, what a stupid expression. It wasn't very pleasurable. But no, I mean, it was a group that anyone could get involved in. The whole point of Fitwatch was that it was a tactic that anyone could get involved in. It certainly wasn't subject to anything that, I suggested strategies. I wrote some of our articles and I was on the streets doing stuff. But I think this is really actually links back to something I wanted to say about both M19 and Sack Parliament. So on this particular event, I was arrested because I had to answer bail that same day. And we walked down the road and the police tried to impose a kettle. I had a bail sheet. There's some footage somewhere of me showing the police this bail sheet. And I was trying to say to these police officers, I need to leave this kettle because I need to go and answer bail. If I don't leave this kettle, you're going to nick me for being in breach of bail. And they refused to let me leave. So I went to the back of the protest and I tried to do the same thing. Instead of letting me just leave peacefully and answer bail, I was arrested for breach of the peace. So, this was another, what I've described as bullshit arrests. There was utterly no, the blaming me, and there's a report from HN3 that does the same thing, of somehow blaming me for the way that the police were targeting me. Also, at this point, I wasn't getting arrested for footwatch all the time. That was before all that started happening. And in relation to sack Parliament, I was arrested because the police tried to form the police were moving in to form a kettle. I didn't want to be arrested and I didn't want to be part of the kettle. So I moved to the back of Parliament Square, where I was tackled by forward intelligence officers. I was thrown to the floor and I was arrested as an organiser of the protest, despite not living in London or having anything to do with the organisation. There was a clear targeting of organisers on that day. The police kettled everyone in Parliament Square and sent in snatch squads to nick people. They then took the details of people that they didn't arrest as an intelligence gathering operation, supposedly on the basis that they might be reported for an offence. Again, I wasn't charged. But they were very targeted arrests in what is described in one of the documents as being planned as a robust policing response. At M19, I'd left the main group in Paternoster Square and I was standing at the gates of the square handing out leaflets, about the issues. I was just engaging politely with with members of the public, talking to them about Bearing Point, about the plunder of Iraq's resources. I was having conversations with people. I was leafleting. I ran out of leaflets, and so I went back to the main group to get some more leaflets. When I got back out, the FIT said to me, if you go back into the square again, you will be arrested for breach. They'd put Section 14 conditions on the protest by this point. They said you would be arrested for breach of Section 14. Then, a few minutes later, I got told that if I didn't go and join the main protest, I would be arrested for Section 14. So I got completely contradictory directions, and I was just handing out leaflets. So I carried on handing out leaflets, and then within sort of 5 to 10 minutes, a van load of City of London cops showed up, and again threw me on the floor and arrested me. Again, no charges. And I find this kind of language on insistence on getting arrested really, really deeply offensive and deeply problematic. It is blaming me for the times I have been targeted, the times I have been wrongfully arrested, the times I have tried to exercise my democratic right to protest and the police have suppressed that right and assaulted me and imprisoned me. And there is no scenario where I am insisting on getting arrested. I know my rights, I will argue my rights, I may be annoying, but I am not insisting on getting arrested. And that is such an offensive way of talking about a series of arrests and incidents that I found and I still find at times deeply traumatising, and just so dismissive.
I want to move on to your arrest and HN18's arrest at the DSCI car park. So again, I wonder if that's a convenient moment to have a break before going on to that topic.
Yes, of course. 10 minutes? 10-minute break.
Emily, I'm going to ask, in fact, if we can put your statement up on the screen at this point. It's page 125, please, of Emily's statement. I wonder if we could expand paragraph 7.44, please. Sorry, 7.44. It's my mistake. Must have given you the wrong page number. But please, could we go to 7.44, the paragraph? Thank you. So, in terms of context and the importance of the event I'm going to ask you about, because you set out here in your statement that the risk assessment describes how HN3 and HN60 were arrested whilst enacting their exit strategies. It also describes how HN30 was the supervisor and cover officer for Rob Harrison, so HN18, and that in her opinion, quote, senior management used the perceived mismanagement of this arrest to close the unit. It also emphasised that Rob Harrison was arrested for a minor public order offence. And so in terms of its significance in relation to the closure of the SDS, so if we do go back, please, thank you, to page 125, I just want to go through with you, please, what happened at DSEI. And you've set out in your statement an overview of this action. And if we just go through it, because we pick up with you leaving the hospital on the Monday night, travelling to a squat in Stepney Green, and you say that there was a group of you had arranged to meet there to finalise the plannings for the action, which was due to take place on Tuesday morning. Is that right?
That's right. I think in terms of the sort of headspace I was in leading into this, I think it's actually important to go back to the Monday very briefly. So on the Monday during the day, I had gone with a friend just to have a walk around the Excel Centre because they put all different closures in place ahead of ICES, and we just wanted to have a look at the general area and what was going on. And I was stopped by the FIT team. I was handcuffed for a stop and search, and then I was accused of breaching bail conditions. They were bail conditions that had been dropped by the court the previous week. I told them this, and they didn't listen and didn't check, and instead arrested me for breaching my bail conditions. I was kept on the floor waiting for a van to take me to West End Central. So it took about 2 hours for us to get there. When we, searched at the scene, when we got to the police station, one of the FIT officers claimed that he said that I was fiddling with the back of my trousers and he believed I had a concealed weapon. I've got no record of carrying weapons. I've never carried a weapon on a protest. He wouldn't have known that. It was just purely vindictive. It resulted in another forced strip search, which again I got compensation for at a later date and for the wrongful arrest. I was fingerprinted by force, even though I told them that breach of bail conditions isn't a criminal offence, so there's no actual right for the police to take fingerprints. And I couldn't put any weight down on my wrist afterwards. And, after a couple of hours at the police station, I was eventually, obviously, released without charge because I hadn't done anything. I went straight from the police station to Capital Radio because I was doing a media interview about Dicey, and I sort of just made the interview. I went from there to a protest at a hotel that was connected to Dicey, and then my friends persuaded me that I should go to the hospital and have my wrist x-rayed. FIT officers followed me to the hospital. It's noted in my medical records that the police were there, the medical staff were, outraged that there were police following me there. We managed to lose them in the hospital. My friend knew his way around the hospital really well. And so when we pick up at the start of this point, I'd had quite a long day.
So really, in the way you've described it, had really been through a lot, even before this day.
Happened. That's why I thought it was important to add that bit of context. Like, after I left hospital, there was a lot that led up in that day to me leaving hospital on the Monday night.
And you set out there, and this is just the second sentence, 7.1, our plan was to get into the DSEI car park and see how far we could get. Ultimately, we wanted to get into the Excel Centre, although we knew it was unlikely that many or even any of us would be able to enter the building. In many ways, it was a symbolic action. Is that right?
Oh, yeah, completely.
You say it had been. I had been on a recce with a friend sometime in the run-up to DSEI, and we'd identified a small pedestrian entryway to the car park, which we correctly thought would be less policed and would give us a better chance of getting close to the arms fair. When we arrived, a group of us ran across the car park towards the entrance, and as we did so, some of us were assaulted by the security guards. We were all arrested and later charged with aggravated trespass. One of those arrested with us was Rob Harrison. So looking back on that now, do you remember who HN18 was?
No, that didn't ring any bells. I mean, there were a few people at that meeting the night before that I didn't know. So, but they, everyone there was trusted by someone else that I knew, but there were people there that I didn't know at the meeting. So it doesn't surprise me that he doesn't particularly stick out in my memory, and especially because, I was very tired, I was in pain, and I was traumatised, so it doesn't surprise me that I don't remember the people that were at the meeting.
Now, you go on in your next paragraph to talk about HN18 being interviewed at a secure location. I want to ask you about something that HN18 said in those interviews. I wonder if we could take down Emily's statement. If we can go to MPS 0748203, please. So at your tab B127. This is the second part of the transcript of HN18's interview following his arrest. And you can see that if we just linger on the first page, you can see person interviewed, common wheel, so his cover code name given there. And you can see the interviewing officers have been redacted and just referred to as officers 1 and 2, but you can see that manager HN72 is present during these interviews. I wonder if we could go to page 9, please, in this particular transcript. Now, one of the things, so he's describing what's happened, the planning, and he's trying to communicate to the interviewing officers what his role was. And so if we just pick up with the last paragraph, well, the squat to leave would be, if you're going to do that, you may as well end the operation at that point. So what he's talking about is, well, you can't just walk out when the planning's going on. He talks about phones being handed in. It's not possible to leave at that point and to warn your managers of what's going to happen. Do you remember that actually happening in the last minute planning stage where you're at the squat, phones being handed in? And so is that something that did happen?
With any sort of organisation like that, I think at that squat we left our phones in the kitchen, but it wasn't this kind of like someone comes and takes your phone and then gives it back. It sort of like gives it a sense of fact. We just like left our phones in another room and then we got them back when we'd finished the planning. There was nothing more to it than that. Just because we knew that our phones were listened to, so if we were actually doing the action planning, we'd have put the phones in another room. But he would have had access to it afterwards. He could also have left at any point. Everything that I'm involved in operates on the basis of informed consent. So if someone doesn't know about a plan prior to a sort of action planning meeting like that beforehand, anyone who kind of goes, no, that's too risky for me, or that isn't something I feel comfortable doing for X or Y reasons, that is totally fine. That wouldn't draw any suspicion whatsoever. And in fact, I had a friend who came to the meeting and decided that actually he didn't want to be part of the action, and that was totally fine. No one thought anything of it.
The way in which he phrases it here is, well, you may as well say, I get up, I walk out this room, and you don't talk to me again. I will have no further contact with you. I'll have no further access to anything that's meaningful. All the things you really need to state here is that decisions about things like this take place in pubs and elsewhere. They don't take place in public. And so again, he's saying that, well, this is not a case where you could simply have walked away. This is where you, as an undercover officer, you really need to be there. And if you start walking out of meetings such as this, you're going to draw attention to yourself.
And I wouldn't have drawn attention to him. If someone had said, oh, actually, I hadn't, like, for example, with this particular action, we knew when we were talking about it that there was quite a high likelihood that we would get arrested for it, because we know how the police work. If someone had come to that meeting and kind of gone, actually, no, I don't want to take that risk, that would have been absolutely fine. Like, we don't force people to go out on actions. Just because you go to an organising meeting doesn't mean you actually have to go out and do the thing. And we wouldn't. And I wouldn't want somebody to. Like, I would find it deeply distressing if someone came to an action planning meeting like that, heard the plan and kind of went, oh no, that's not for me, and felt obligated to go along with it. That would be awful. I'd be really upset if anyone felt like that in our organising.
When we were addressing the topic of the Grosvenor Hotel arrest, and we went through all of the various stages of your court case, could you just, in summary, explain what happened to you after you were arrested in relation to this particular incident? So the plan was to try and get into the car park, the security were there, then the police were there, you were arrested, HN18's arrested. As far as you were concerned, from your perspective at the time, what happened next?
So we were kept in the car park for a really long time, and turns out that they were waiting for fit officers to turn up and come and identify or come and take photographs of people, and we're like getting people out of the vans to photograph them. Of course, I know they came to the van and asked me to get out, and I was just like, well, no, I'm not getting out the van for you. And they just went, oh, it's you. They told me they like my sunglasses. So after a long time, went back to West End Central. It was a really long journey. I remember I was in a huge amount of pain from my wrist and being handcuffed again. To the point when we got there, my friend told me I'd gone a funny colour, and I did feel like I was about to pass out. So eventually we all got processed. I was interviewed and charged with aggravated trespass and given bail conditions not to associate with each other, not to be in the vicinity of sort of certain areas around where the protests were taking place. And I think something else. But yeah, we were given quite harsh bail conditions for what is described as a minor offence.
And then what happened to those bail conditions? What happened to that case against you?
Well, the case itself was dropped. I got arrested on the Thursday at the dinner for breaching those bail conditions, and ended up with a daily signing condition that was sort of like 12-1 that really impacted on my life. They said it was to stop me going to any protests. And that had a huge impact on my life because I had a very small child at the time. I was a toddler. And like we had to keep disrupting each day. Like we'd be on the beach and had to go, we've got to go to the police station now. And it was quite ridiculous. I think Hastings sort of describes the bail conditions as being able to have a nice break. But it wasn't like that, and it cut off access to my friends as well, in theory.
Sorry, I was going to ask how the case concluded.
Oh, well, the charges were all dropped.
What was the reason that was given? Now, you've described, and right at the beginning of your evidence, you talked about being arrested a number of times, but not very often that you're actually charged let alone convicted of anything. But at what stage were the charges dropped, and what was the reason given for dropping the charges? How was that communicated to you?
So there was an initial hearing that my tenant was excused at because of the distance from where I live and because I'd already been kept in custody from the arrest on Thursday. And then there was a second court hearing, and I think that's when they were dropped. I think it was said that it wasn't in the public interest to continue, but I'd have to look at the letter again to confirm that. But again, like with aggravated trespass, we weren't given any warnings about our behaviour or anything like that. There wasn't any of the sort of prerequisites in place for an aggravated trespass arrest. I think I just wanted to go back to the bail conditions because I think it's really notable that HN72 says that he presumed that the arrest was for the purpose of imposing bail conditions and that he was aware of a non-SDS example of an activist being given bail conditions to stop them from protesting. And again, it's one of those things that we have always known, that arrests are made and bail conditions are imposed to restrict our right to protest, to repress what we're doing and to put conditions on our lives. They're a form of punishment, and that even the presumption that arrests might have been made just to impose bail conditions is utterly unlawful. And I think there is such a huge question of what the attitude is from the police, whether that's the undercovers, whether that's the managers, whether that's CO11, wherever it is within the policing structure, of their attitude towards the law and breaking the law. We've seen it in other documents where one of 810.3's ones about the potential for arresting RTS organisers, that the reason they didn't go ahead with the plan to unlawfully arrest people was because the activists knew their rights and they would sue. So the consideration wasn't about the fact this would have been assault, this would have been forced imprisonment. These would have been serious offences and serious assaults and serious restrictions on our rights when they knew there was no evidence. Like, there is a serious question about how the police themselves view the law, how they impose the law, and why they think they can hold it in utter contempt in how they operate.
Began this last session by referring to what you set out in your witness statement about HN30, saying that in her opinion, senior management used the perceived mismanagement of this arrest to close the entire SDS unit. But after the charges were dropped against you, was there any suspicion, any thoughts that, well, something very strange has happened here, or yet again the same thing happening?
No, it was yet again the same thing happening. It was a kind of like, well, if we'd run into the car park and we'd disrupted something or we'd obstructed something or we had done something, then maybe there might have been a case. But in terms of what we did, we just ran into an area and we all got arrested. So there wasn't really any, there wasn't a substantive charge anyway. So no, there was no suspicions around that. As far as I'm aware, HN30 isn't giving evidence, and it would be very, very good to hear from her, because there are these really, really important questions around all of this and some of the other reporting that would be good to hear answers from her on.
Whilst we have HN18's interview transcript, may I just ask you something else about what is set out here? If we can go forward, please, to page 11. Again, it's the last paragraph on page 11. So this is HN18 being interviewed, and we know HN72's interview as well. I just want to ask you about what he says here. He says, no, I think I would just like to say, generally speaking, the operation on that day was very successful. What we managed to do was have a point where we had 20 or so activists in one location who were arrested on the first day of a major event that was going to possibly have major publicity during the course of the week, and because of the fact that they were arrested and the fact that they can be bailed and they can have bail conditions imposed upon them, I think we saved a great deal of money subsequently after that, because they were not free for the rest of the week to do whatever they may or not wish to do. I regard it as a success. What's the impact on you reading HN18's description of this arrest as a success for the reasons that he sets out?
Oh, it's disgusting. I mean, it's an infringement on Article 10 and 11 rights yet again. And, you know, the language of it, the event might have had major publicity. It's not even, like, they're not even going as far as saying we might have committed disorder. There might have been publicity around our protests. So what, we're going back to causing embarrassment to the government, embarrassment to the arms trade? Or was it success because we weren't able to cause embarrassment to the arms trade, that we weren't able to highlight the deals in death and destruction that happen at DSEI? And the fact that an officer thinks that it's a success because we can have our freedoms curtailed and we can have bail conditions imposed on us for what even they describe as a very minor offence, I mean, it's outrageous. And it's outrageous to consider this a success. And I think, like, I understand why, obviously, so I'm not saying this in a funny way, but, you know, like, I've been asked about the policing purposes of, you know, whether I think things are justified, I mean, whether that was a justifiable policing purpose. You know, there are questions to be asked about what is the policing purpose of imposing bail conditions on people? How does that fit within the framework of what police officers are allegedly supposed to do and how they're allegedly supposed to uphold the law? Because it does not fit. You know, the law is not there for the police to manipulate, to abuse, to use to shut down our protests. That's not why the law exists.
If we can please take that document down. I want to ask you about one more document about this arrest, and then I want to ask you some questions about the impact of the SDS upon you. Could we please turn up MPS 0526935? So this is at your tab B87. Again, we're looking at a bundle of documents that authorised HN18's deployment. And I wonder, again, it's a bundle of these authorities. Please could we put up on screen for Emily page 47 and paragraph 2, please, on page 47. I'm going to confirm the number MPS 0526935, tab B87. Perhaps I can do this another way. I understand we may have an issue with the screen, but what I will do, Emily, is I'll simply read to you the passage and then ask you some questions about it. So again, it's referring to HN18 as CW Common Wheel. Let's one last time. So, well, let me begin reading, and we'll see where we get to. So, what it's set out here is as follows. CW's arrest is an indication of the increasing difficulties faced by UCPs operating in the arena of public order under the intense gaze of forward intelligence teams. FITs are a vital element for policing potentially troublesome public order events and undoubtedly prevent disorder. Recently, activists associated with both CCA and Disarm DSEI have begun to band together to oppose the FITs under the guise of FitWatch, it is assessed that Emily Apple and others are currently in the process of giving serious consideration to instigating civil proceedings against the MPS in connection with their policing methods. This in itself will also make it more difficult for CW to operate in a more hostile environment where activists will be looking to identify and document, quote, police malpractice in support of such civil actions. What is your reaction to reading in one of HN18's authorities reference to him operating in a more hostile environment where activists, in particular you, looking to identify and document police malpractice?
I mean, I think it's a very strange phrasing, which I don't quite understand, given that we were documenting the overt policing. I think one of the things I haven't mentioned that is worth mentioning in terms of Harrison's Hastings authorisations is the biggest risk that he faced was from over-enthusiastic policing. So the entire risk that he faced was from the police themselves. I think there is, and we haven't really touched on it, this reporting on civil cases I think is really, really, really important, and it's an issue with HN3 as well. That undercover officers should not have been reporting on actions on our civil cases and giving the Met litigation advantage. I think that is awful and needs exploring more. I think particularly in relation to, I tried to bring a harassment case, and this was earlier than this was 2004, when I first tried to bring a harassment case against the forward intelligence team, and I had a lot of documented evidence, and it's where the criminal intelligence reports that have been shown to the inquiry come from. And I was told, and Victoria was the other person who tried to take that civil action. HN3 was listed as a potential witness for that. And one of the things that we were told was that we couldn't provide evidence of a single controlling mind. So the response we had from the Met Police's solicitors were these were all just individual events that had no connection to each other. And because we couldn't provide that evidence, then we could not bring a harassment case against the Met. So in the end, I settled the case as a series of assaults and wrongful arrests. But that case was so seriously undermined, knowing what we know now, knowing what Welling said about being traced, leading to more Tracy, I can never remember the exact wording of that, knowing what we know now about the relationship between the SDS and the CO11 and the FIT teams and what happened on the streets. I had an entire civil case around harassment and around the fact that what they did broke my mental health, completely undermined by the withholding of evidence in that case. And in terms of this one, yeah, I mean, we would have been talking about taking civil action against the police, because I spent a lot of my life taking civil action against the police because I believe there should be some accountability for what they've done to me over the years, but it should not have been reported on by SDS officers.
Well, one of the things that you've made very clear is that the effect of the SDS on you is still present today because of what's recorded in all the documents, and something that you've said in relation to the impact that the SDS has had upon you, and you're very clear about that. But focusing on the SDS, and of course you've referred to the FIT teams for obvious reasons, but could you just help us with trying to understand, to those who've never been through any of what you have been through, and very specific to the SDS, how that has impacted upon your life, please?
Just living with that profound sense of betrayal of... actually, this is from an old diary that I wrote in, I think it must have been 2013 or 2014, when I was having therapy after a mental health breakdown. And I only found it a couple of weeks ago. But what I wrote then was, I shut it out for so many years. I've written about the grieving process with regard to spies, but I've never been through it. Never cried until I couldn't breathe, never really felt the pain. Somehow I thought it was the assaults, the arrests, the harassment which had worn me down. And undoubtedly they have. And, I do have a large amount of trauma revolving around too many key incidents. But underlying all of this, bubbling away, is the pain of betrayal and the incontrovertible fact I entrusted my beautiful baby into the hands of people who turned out to be total scum. And for me, that's the impact. It's the impact of my child. It's the impact in how I trust, how I work. And I do trust people. I've coped by still being open, by still working with people, by still doing what I do. And excuse my language, but I think my ultimate fuck you to the SDS is the fact that I will still trust people, I will still work people, and I will still get out on the streets doing stuff, because that is so fundamentally important to me and who I am. And I am not going to let them stop me do that. But the actual impact in terms of trauma, in terms of unpicking all of your life and going, is this real? What is real? What was made up? And then the impact of not only having that intrusion, but that intrusion not even being accurate, that there's so many lies, that there's so many exaggerations, that despite the fact that they thought they needed to be in our movements, that they didn't stop anything happening, and they still didn't understand our movements. They willfully not understood our movements or what we were about to justify what they were doing. And yeah, it's a profound impact. It's quite difficult to put into words quite what this gross intrusion in our lives has done.
At this point, we would stop for a short while to see if there are any Rule 10 questions, and of course to allow time after that for any re-examination. But at this point, is there any further direct factual evidence you would like to give before we have that break, please?
Yeah, there's a couple of really small points I want to make and one more substantial point. I think it's really important to note, and I'm saying this as still a current NEJ member, about the targeting of journalists. We've seen reports on NEJ members. We've seen press interest in Section 44 searches. We've seen reports that there's going to be embedded journalists at protests. The independence and the supposedly free press of our country is supposed to be one of the foundations of our democracy, and that has been totally undermined in SDS reporting and how they look at what could be sympathetic journalists. I've got, that continues to this day because I've got criminal intelligence reports from 2017 when I was working as a journalist where the police say, oh, Emily's focused on working as a journalist. Well, why record it? And I think the targeting of journalists is really, really, really important, and why that was necessary. I think, and this is going to be even more of a problem going into Tranche 4, the issue over closed officers. I think if the evidence of pretty much all the officers that we'd heard from had just been taken on face value, if we hadn't kept records, if we hadn't been willing to come here and say what we've been through about what we believe and why we organise, those records could be taken on face value. And I don't doubt that there would be stuff that would undermine what is in those reports. And I think that's going to be more of an issue moving forward, is how do we contradict that evidence? Like Grosvenor House hotel arrest, if I hadn't kept those videos and I hadn't kept all my court papers and those records, then it would just be my word against, you know, a detective inspector saying I'd fabricated my evidence. You know, like there is just so much there. I think there is... I'm only going to touch on this very, 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 very briefly, I promise, because I know the inquiry doesn't want to go here. But I think there is an issue with corporate spies. I think so. Martin Hogben, who was due to be my child's godfather, who infiltrated CAT for years, knew HN3 very, very well. He also knew Simon Wellings, and Simon Wellings reported on him. They were supposed to be reporting back on corporate spies. That's one of the things even in some of the management statements they say about one of the roles was to report on people they suspected to be corporate chizzers. HN3 wasn't directly, he was asked sort of roundabout questions about it, but he wasn't directly asked about Hogben, how he knew him. And also, importantly, what happened after CAT exposed him, because we had this period of time when we didn't believe the allegations against him because of bad legal advice at the time to CAT, and we weren't shown the files. And so we carried on working with him, with HN3. So you've then got a situation where an undercover officer is knowingly working with a corporate spy. So... what risk assessments were done around that? Even if they didn't know beforehand, but I mean, he seemed to imply that he could recognise them very easily. So that's interesting. But in terms of what risk assessments were done by that, was it, you know, at the point at which they realised, was there then an intelligence sharing protocol if there hadn't been before? Because we've got nearly a 2-year period where HN3 is spying on me and working in our groups that Hogben is still involved in. And we know that between 95 and 99 there were 6 to 8 corporate spies in CAT. We know later in 2006 that Paul Mercer was contracted by Rod Leeming to provide information on CAT. Rod Leeming was the former head of the ARNI. We've got this revolving door between corporate spies and senior police officers that are infiltrating our movements and reporting on us. And we've heard in Tranche 2 evidence of the fact that they knew about each other. And I do believe that there was still that information sharing. And obviously I can't prove it, but I think there are sort of real questions around it, and especially around that period when the SDS knew, and when we were still working with Martin. I think there's a real issue with missing voices. I was put on the green list by the Consulting Association and was essentially blacklisted, but I'm not a construction worker. It had no impact on my life whatsoever. And we should be hearing from Dave Smith and the impact of the people who had their livelihoods ruined by the SDS and the reporting on them. And sorry, I'm nearly finished, I promise. I think the other legacy of the SDS is that its words, its narrative still exists today. So the SDS, they built a narrative about all of us, whether it was fake bomb plots, whether it was, plans to firebomb charity shops, in my case, that I wanted to target fit officers' families. They created a narrative of threat, of extremism that still exists today. The same language that the SDS using, they're still using now. So I had subject access request data from 2023 from SA15. And in that, they've made assumptions about a young person that I was with, saying that, oh, they might be my daughter. Now, this is someone I'm very close to, but I don't have a daughter. And they've just made another wild assumption. They've said, they've followed us from a cafe to the camp at Dicey. They said, oh, you know, Emily was checking out the fence on the way, probably looking for weak points. And again, it's these like wild assumptions out of nowhere. And that same language that's being used in 2023. I have no doubt the same language is on my police files now. So we've got this narrative that was built to justify a threat, to justify their jobs, a narrative that was to justify political policing that is still running through policing today. And that is a real legacy of the SDS. And right now we are living in one of the most repressive climates that I have ever seen for protest. And that is possible because of the SDS, because of that language, because of those threads that still run through all the reporting, that the threats that they made up in relation to me 20 years ago are still coming up today. And it can't be just looked at historically because it's still going on today. But ultimately, the whole thing is about political policing. In the 90s, we had this amazing hope. You know, another world is possible. It wasn't a slogan. It was something we believed we could achieve positive social change. We wanted to occupy spaces. We wanted to have street parties. We wanted to create children's play areas. We wanted to be creative and do things differently. And we were policed out of existence. And they've done the same thing now. They've done the same thing with Extinction Rebellion, with Just Stop Oil. They've been policed out of existence. And we need to look at how we treat protest, that protest should be celebrated. We can't call all protest disorder. We can't call all protest extremists. We can't other all protesters. We need to be celebrating that incredibly rich, beautiful history of people being prepared to do what's necessary to bring about social change. And that social change does not happen through just signing a petition and going on a march. Those things are important, but it's that diversity of tactics. It's having the people who are prepared to push those boundaries and to take things further, to create those moments that change the narrative, that is so important, that we wouldn't be sitting where we are today. We wouldn't have the rights that we have today without those people. I'm really proud that I've played a really small and insignificant part in that, and I hope that I can carry on doing that. But when you've got a policing strategy that is to police a group out of existence, that is a fundamental attack on our rights. That is a fundamental attack on how all of us live, how we should want a democracy to look. And I think that is the legacy of the SDS. I think in terms of what they didn't achieve anything. They manufactured lies, they did appalling things, but they weren't gathering evidence. They were just gathering reams and reams and reams and reams of intelligence. But they created that narrative, and I don't know what would have happened without them. I don't know what would have happened without that narrative. But if we'd been allowed to create those spaces, we're in a really dark time at the moment. We've got the repression of protest. We've got the most horrendous war going on. We've got the rise of fascism. We've got race riots on our streets. We've got the climate catastrophe raging. And who knows, if we'd been given that chance to create, to occupy those spaces, maybe we could have averted the rise of fascism. Maybe we could have diminished the influence of the arms trade. Maybe we could put a brake on the climate catastrophe. Now, that's all very grandiose. I don't think it's like, I'm not saying that we would have achieved those things, but I would really been allowed to try, that we could have attempted to do that we could have been allowed to use our voices, to occupy spaces, and to create that change. And that was shut down. And I think the SDS has so much to answer for, not only in terms of political policing, not only in terms of what they did to us individually, but into the situation that we find ourselves in today and what we are facing today. And that's the legacy of the SDS.
So we have not been alerted to any Rule 10 questions. I don't know whether it's appropriate to rise for that to be confirmed.
Is there any re-examination?
Yes, I'll be maybe 6 or 7 minutes. I'm happy to do it now.
I think if you were to do that now,
Yep.
and I will then rise, and I don't anticipate needing to come back in to deal with Rule 10 questions, but if there were to be any, then I could wait and do that.
Thank you, sir.
I think that's most efficient use of time.
Thank you.
Sorry, I went on a bit.
No, don't worry at all.
Thank you. Just 3 hopefully short points from me. The first one is Fairford. You've been asked a series of questions about the involvement of HN3, Jason Bishop, before and leading up to the third Fairford coaches and then being stopped and turned back. I just want to briefly ask you about his involvement in the fallout from that incident, so after that. Now, we don't need to put it up, but in your witness statement at paragraph 5-187, you refer to HN3's report of the 31st of March, which is just over a week after the third coaches, the ones that were stopped and turned back. And just for the record, that's MPS 0028778. Now, that shows that he was present at a dicey coordinating group at which you were present. Would it be correct to say that whenever he was or wasn't around at the time, he was certainly involved very shortly after that incident?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, he was involved very shortly afterwards, and I think there's a report from him from the BPAGM that's beginning of April. So
yes,
yeah,
indeed there
was
is.
back.
I think that's the next paragraph in the statement.
Sorry.
And would it be right that he would have been involved in, or at least cited on discussions regarding responses to what had happened with the Fairford coaches?
Oh yeah, absolutely, because we would have been talking about it a lot because it was such a big...
It was a big deal.
It was a big deal.
Yeah. And of course it led on to the litigation that we all know about. And so that the proposals for legal claims would also have...
Oh yes, yeah, he would absolutely have known about those. And also because... like, we weren't on the coaches, but we were working with the people who were on the coaches because we were helping people like contact other passengers on the coach because we had to coordinate.
Right, so he'd have been cited at least, involved in those discussions.
Yeah.
Second point, different topic. A theme of your evidence is that the exaggerated intelligence about your activities and the activities of others led to excessive policing responses. Now, I'm going to refer to a few documents, but I'm not going to ask them put up in the interests of time, and I know you're familiar with them. So I'll just take snippets out of them and put the documents on the record. So from the disclosure, it's clear that there was briefing from the SDS, at least 2 sources of the SDS, to Tayside Police regarding the GA, to which you've given a little bit of evidence earlier. The first of those was from Simon Wellings, HN118, and the reference is MPS 0526933 at page 43. And that refers to, quote, personal briefings by him to Tayside Police, described by them as, quote, invaluable. And secondly, by HN3, Jason Bishop, and the reference is MPS 0526873 at page 22. And he, quote, provided time-critical intelligence which assisted Tayside Police in connection with planning a large-scale public order event. That was obviously the event that we know about. And then from jumping forward from that, the 2 undercover officers arrested, Jason Bishop himself, HN3, in his Operation Hearn notes at MPS 0723153 at page 8, said we had genuinely done nothing wrong. And HN 60 Dave Jones, again Operation Hearn notes, MPS 0738067 at page 4. So, and this is a document Mr. Ramble took you to earlier, where he says we were fitted up, quote unquote. So it's apparent from those reports that their view that there was they were arrested with you, of course, no proper basis for your arrest, and indeed the charges against you were dropped. I'm not going to ask you about the events itself, but can you describe the impact this has had on you, finding out, first of all, that the SDS had influenced the policing itself, but also that the SDS officers themselves arrested with you viewed the arrests as effectively improper? What effect, given the evidence of your circumstances at the time with the baby, the fact that the police were talking about social services involvement, what impact has this all had on you?
So that arrest was deeply, deeply traumatic because I had made the decision that I would just help with driving because I had my baby with me, and that was something useful that I could do. It was the first night that I'd been separated from my child. He was like, my friend was amazing. She came and collected him. But, you know, he was really upset when I had to hand him over. I was still breastfeeding him. I hadn't slept the night before either. And I was hugely, hugely upset. And then when we were in court the next day, we had news of the 7/7 bombings, and I knew that my partner at the time would be on his way to Scotland in case he was needed to look after him. And so then I had the added sort of worry that he would have been travelling at the time that happened. And I remember sort of just afterwards, me and my friend who also had his daughter there, we were just like, we need to get out of Scotland. It's not safe as being here with our children. You know, the fact that you can't be around a protest with a child, and the fact it was such a massive police operation as well.
Learning about the fact of the police briefing and the fact of what the police have subsequently said about the arrests, has that had any impact on you in terms of the SDS reporting itself?
Yeah, I mean, it's all quite ludicrous, isn't it? Welling's being praised for all these invaluable briefings, and HN3 for time-critical intelligence that led to an arrest of their 2 officers. Like, God knows what they were doing, I think, really. Because it's just... It's beyond ludicrous. I mean, and Wellings could not have possibly been providing that good intelligence anyway, given what we know about him. But the fact that they were supposedly providing this invaluable intelligence that then led to us and, you know, the 2 of them being arrested. I mean, if it didn't have such an impact, it would be farcical.
Yes.
But also, I'd say that the way I was asked before about whether there was any suspicions with Harrison Hastings' arrest when those charges were dropped, and then there weren't. But there was always something very, very strange about the way the Scottish arrests were dropped, because they were treating it so seriously and telling us we were going to be remanded.
Finally, from me, and just a short point, you referred to your awareness that there's a violence marker against you going back at least 16 years, and that remains on your record. Given your evidence that you've no convictions for violence, no convictions for public order, what impact does that have on you now, and what do you think should happen to the violence marker?
Well, the violence marker should be removed. It should never have been placed there in the first place. But it has a massive impact. So after I had my second mental health breakdown, I wasn't able to do any frontline stuff at all. And then I slowly went back to stuff, and I went back to stuff as a journalist, and I was very, very strict when I worked as a journalist. I would not get involved in anything because I actually, I treat that role as being a journalist really seriously. And, I wouldn't want to jeopardise other journalists, and it was important to me that if I was there, I was just reporting on things. So I did that for a while. And then I started going back to things. But I'm very, very wary of my mental health and how things impact me and how I know policing is going to impact me. And I have to be very, very mindful of the situations that I'm in, how I respond to situations, and how the police might treat me. Having those kind of markers still on the record means that I'm still over-policed. I am still treated more harshly than I should be treated, that the police are still treating me as a violent threat despite not having any convictions for violence, despite none of the undercover officers that I've had so far given any evidence that I was involved in any violence, that they are still on my record and having an impact today. I mean, I find it really upsetting, actually.
Thank you very
and
much.
impacts my ability to organise and be on the streets.
Thank you very much. That's all I have, sir.
Thank you. On the forgive me. On the assumption that there are no further questions, this will be the last time that you will be sitting in that chair and listening to what I have to say. May I say thank you to you?
Thank you.
I have heard an enormous amount of evidence from a very wide variety of people, and it is of the greatest assistance to hear it from all sorts of different people, including, if I may say, a person as striking as yourself. I'm very grateful to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I wish we'd heard from more of us in this tranche, is all I can say from that.
There is,
Thank you.
I do have a statutory duty to have regard to the amount of money that all this is costing, and I'm afraid these hearings are expensive, and it's therefore...
Absolutely, but if you're not hearing from the people actually targeted, it's quite difficult, isn't it? I agree to disagree.
Now is not the time for me to engage in a debate with you about
I'm
this.
not suggesting you do.
Thank you.
No worries.